You're very welcome to this evening's Breastival campaigning session. Great to see so many of you joining us. We're about to hear from a range of volunteer campaigners who are going to talk to us about their campaigning journeys and the changes that have happened as a result, which are benefiting women and families across the island of Ireland. My name is Claire Flynn. I'm proud to be a board member of Breastival, and I will be chairing this session tonight. My background is in public affairs, communications and campaigning, so I'm really excited to learn from all of our speakers and to hear about what inspired them to become involved in their individual campaigning work. So just a bit of housekeeping for me. So we're going to hear from each of the speakers and then we'll have an opportunity at the end of the session to ask some questions. So people can do that either in the chat facility, which Catherine's going to help me ask questions, or if people want to turn on their cameras and ask a question, we can do that too. And then to round things up, we're very excited that we're going to be launching the second ebook from Breastival, and it is our Breastival Breastfeeding Advocacy Toolkit. It's a hard one to say, and it's a resource that we've created for you to help advocate for more support for breastfeeding. So we're really excited to sort of end tonight's session on that. So first of all, I'd like to welcome all of our speakers. First up, we have Bonya Baha. Bonya Baha is made up of 4 amazing women who are inspired by their own experiences of Irish maternity units, and they've had a great campaigning success in improving Irish breastfeeding support services just in the last year. So I'll pass over to 3 of the 4 who are with us this evening. We have Deborah, Lucia and Megan to take us through their presentation. So over to you.
Thanks, Claire. Hi, everybody. I'm Deborah, and thank you just so much to Breastival for inviting us this evening. We're really honoured to be here. So like Claire said, my name is Deborah, and I'm also joined by Lucia and Meg from our team. And Felicienne says hello, she can't be here this evening. And we're 4 working mothers. We started a campaign, well, it all started about a year ago, and we run this in our spare time. We don't have funding or political affiliations. And the ultimate goal, I suppose, was that at the moment in the wards in Irish maternity units, if you wish to formula feed, you're given formula, you're told how to formula feed. If you wish to breastfeed, the same thing doesn't necessarily happen. It seems to come down to chance and circumstance, and that's something that we wanted to address. And so that's how things started. That's what our ultimate goal has been. So if you can go on to the 3rd slide, you see it? So there's our team there. And then onto the 3rd slide. So my story is what started the whole mess. It took me about 7 weeks to establish breastfeeding. I had to spend quite a bit of money to get there. I had to hire a lactation consultant. I had a tongue tie procedure. I bought a pump. I hired a pump. I got mastitis. I helped with the GP. It was a very difficult journey, and my time in hospital pretty much started that. Midwives were excellent, but they were just far too busy to sit with me and to help me my baby latch. The lactation consultant wasn't available, and the solution offered was to formula feed. And so by the time I left the hospital, I was tandem pumping, formula feeding, and breastfeeding when I could. So the only reason I was able to succeed was because of the support of my partner and having funds to be able to get the help privately. And I realized that I wasn't the only person. I joined a local breastfeeding group, and a lot of other people had the same experience, that they managed to breastfeed despite the hospital instead of because of it. And so this led me to when Hazel Chu, who's a well-known breastfeeding advocate, she's the Lord Mayor of Dublin. She's just been replaced now. She finished her term, but she put a post online just looking for suggestions on how to improve services. So on the basis of my experience, I created a questionnaire for myself and my friends, but it ended up getting shared on social media. There was just, we received 145 responses, and people just desperate to share their stories, spilling out these experiences of, it was quite harrowing to read. There was a lot of trauma in those stories. And so it was really stark to see that it wasn't just me, it wasn't just my friends, this was a systemic issue. And so at that point, I was in 2 WhatsApp groups, one with Lucia and one with Felicia, and both came on board and helped me comb through the stories and analyze the data. And Meg then helped us, she joined and helped us create this into a report. And that's kind of how things started.
Yeah, so once we went live with the report and our social media strategy, we'll go through the timeline just in a couple of slides now, but you might have seen the first story that popped up there, that we started getting inundated with all these stories on Instagram and Twitter. The first one that popped up there said, "I thought it was only me." And I guess, as Deborah said, these are kind of harrowing stories we were getting, but people were quite surprised that they were not the only one, that it wasn't just bad luck, that it was happening so frequently. And we still get, multiple messages every week coming in on our social media. And I guess a key part of the campaign is that we feel responsibility for these stories that we've received, and we feel that we have a responsibility to use them to make change. So these stories are at the heart of the campaign, and that's how it keeps growing and developing over time.
So, and I suppose just to highlight some of the things, you might have seen the report, but if you haven't, again, just to emphasize the sense of this just being question of luck or just, time, who you meet on the ward. What we got back was that 1 in 4 reported that they didn't really receive the support in the hours after delivery when it comes to breastfeeding. Almost 2/3 sought help privately, and some of them spent nothing, some of them spent over 700 euros, but on average it was about 440 euros. And this is anything from lactation consultants to renting out pumps through to getting tongue-tie procedures and revisits, etc., etc. So first, there was a huge variation in that. But again, I suppose it's the thing of almost 2/3 had to get help outside of hospital. And then every third person was offered, or not necessarily offered, but actually encouraged to switch to formula. So just top them up, give your nipples a rest, etc., etc. So let me just see. So again, as Deborah said, looking through all of the things that came back through the survey, we formulated our 5 key asks that we've put to the public representatives. And these were centered around staffing, so improving access to IBCLCs in maternity wards in the hours after delivery. So again, getting timely professional support. Then professional development, so ensuring that breastfeeding became inherent part of continuous professional development for healthcare professionals that work in maternity units. Revisiting infant feeding policy, so an awful lot of comments in the survey related to the formula trolley, and I don't think that's a thing up in Northern Ireland, but in down south, it's just a thing that is wheeled into the ward every so often, every few hours, and you'll ask if you want this brand or that brand. Then service user engagement, so really ensuring that our maternity units invite feedback of service users and the mothers and the families that they serve and really consider that in how the care is designed. And then auditing and reporting. So again, what we realized when we were putting together this report is the data is relatively thin. There are some indicators that are being collected, but ultimately there isn't enough. And we feel that until we properly measure what is happening in the maternity units, change will be slow.
And so just before we launch the video tonight, Claire said, "Oh, it was great seeing your timeline," and Meg and I joked and we said, "Oh, it's so easy and so straightforward, because you see things in this lovely line and it just looks so neat and purposeful." But behind this was a lot of blood, sweat and tears, and a very, very steep learning curve. This is very new to all of us. But we tried to take as a professional approach as we could. We met every week, and we took minutes and had agendas. We set out goals, and then we'd build on the goal, we'd move to the next goal. And so ultimately, as you can see here, there was the questionnaire which snowballed. We then formulated that into a report. Then we had to decide, what are we going to do with this report? Who should we send it to? And so then in the January of that year, 2021, it was being spoken about in the media. And so we decided, okay, this is a good time. So we launched our social media in February, and we launched a petition to the Minister for Health, to ask him for our key asks and to ask him to meet with us. We also we emailed the report to all of the public representatives and to support organizations, and we asked to meet with them. And that's one thing that we've learned, is that whenever you send anything to a public representative, always have an ask. Try and make a personal connection, because they're much more likely to work for you if they know who you are and they know that you're you know what you're talking about. And so that was we got surprisingly positive response from elected representatives. And so we were invited to speak to the the Women's Parliamentary Caucus. And then in May, a very important part was meeting with the Junior Minister for Health and the Minister for Children. So 2 separate meetings. And at that meeting, we were told, and then it was subsequently announced in the media, that they were going to allocate 1.58 million in funding for the hiring of lactation consultants in hospitals and maternity units throughout Ireland. And before that, there was, I think, 5 maternity units without any lactation consultants at all. So we were obviously absolutely delighted with that news. And we spoke to the Parliamentary Committee on Health, the pre-budget submissions. Just basically, that's something that we've kind of been working on quite recently, where the parties put together their requests for the budget and the recommendations. And so we've tried to get that across the political spectrum as well. And then August brings us to Breastival. So, and then next, well, we're going to see. But that's kind of an overview then of how we've got to this point today.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Deborah, Lucy, and Megan. And no doubt people will have questions, but we're going to, as I said earlier, just hold those to the end. But amazing to be able to influence at the highest level of government, and 1.58 million euro for extra lactation consultants is just fantastic. So, and at the end of the presentation you're talking about the tips and how to get involved. So again, we'll maybe touch on that and draw on your knowledge of that at the end of the session. So many of the concerns that Banya Baha had for maternity services were also being felt north of the border, and I suppose in the last 18 months we've had some great work carried out by our next organisation who's up to speak, which is BirthWise. So I'm delighted to introduce Heidi Brewer from BirthWise. BirthWise is a grassroots movement of expectant and new parents, and for all of those who support them, they've been campaigning for improvements in maternity care and other relevant services. So I'm delighted to hand it over to you, Heidi.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I kind of got involved with BirthWise at the beginning. Knew some of those who were setting up the charity. My own background is around early years working with parents, and recently trained as a breastfeeding counsellor and postnatal practitioner. So my kind of passion is for supporting parents through that whole journey, the whole 1,000 days kind of and beyond. So yeah, BirthWise was officially launched at the Positive Birth Conference in September 2019. And since that time, they've managed to get different streams of funding and had a variety of programs running to support parents. So we've had Mums in the Making, which covered a variety of topics around birth, labour and breastfeeding. We ran a series of workshops based on the Why Matters books from the Pinter and Martin publishers. We've had breastfeeding support groups happening. Currently, we have a programme on birth support for parents. So for those mothers who are not able to have a birth partner with them, we have funding there to provide a doula. So that is ongoing still, and in the last year we have been able to support mothers in all 5 trust areas with that programme. In September last year, BirthWise took on the role of Secretariat for the new Northern Ireland Assembly all-party group of women's health. So that is really going to enable us to maintain a link to grassroots organisations and to really help share women's stories to hopefully affect change in the long run. As part of the launch of BirthWise, and to lost my notes here. As part of the commitment to campaign for improvements, when we were launching BirthWise, we put out a survey. So the BirthWise Maternity Survey 2019 was developed to help inform our campaigning objectives. The survey was open to all women who'd had a baby in Northern Ireland between 2015 and 2019. And we had a total of just short of 2,000 responses to that. So the survey aim was to gather crucial information on the state of the current practice in maternity care, with a particular focus on women's sense of agency and locus of control, by investigating how well informed they felt and how their wishes were respected throughout their maternity care. The key aim of the survey was to explore the views and experiences of women accessing maternity care in Northern Ireland, as well as highlighting important issues in terms of current practice in maternity care. So it covered all aspects such as choice of birthplace, type of care received, antenatal education, induction of labour, caesarean births, infant feeding and postnatal care. And through the survey, we have 14 recommendations for maternity services in Northern Ireland. Thank you very much. And for the purposes of this evening and being with Breastival, my main focus is on number 14, which is looking beyond BFI. Now, every hospital in Northern Ireland is accredited under the Baby Friendly Initiative scheme. Be able to zoom in on the bottom one. The recommendations from the survey, from what mothers said, is that to be in line with the UNICEF requirements, each trust should monitor adherence to the Baby Friendly Initiative standards through an ongoing rolling audit programme. Maternity units should also seek to implement the BFI Achieving Sustainability Standard, which means that they have gone through the accreditation process and they are maintaining those standards over a period of 2 years, and then they get what's otherwise known as the gold standard. Other parts of the recommendation are reviewing breastfeeding support provision and seeking to increase access to support from maternity support workers or equivalent to help women establish breastfeeding and provide that practical support, for example, with positioning and attachment while they're in the postnatal wards. Women who need further support should be referred to a breastfeeding specialist, and parents who are feeding with formula milk should be provided with information and support on how to safely make up feeds and to feed in a responsive way. I mean, I really feel that gaining the BFI accreditation in itself is not enough. I have experience of going through the accreditation process, and it can potentially become, a tick box exercise. So there needs to be a long-term commitment to maintaining the standards, to getting the Achieving Sustainability standards from UNICEF. There needs to be work with all staff across maternity and postnatal services to ensure that they understand the purpose for them maintaining the standards, what the benefits are around breastfeeding and responsive feeding in general, when you're looking at maternity services as a whole. But like I said, every hospital in Northern Ireland is accredited with the Baby Friendly Initiative. Yet women are still having very varied experiences in the feeding support they receive. So Catherine, if you could pop up the other infographic, this gives some of the outcomes from the maternity survey. And at the bottom, the section on feeding shows that 39% of the women who completed the survey felt they did not get adequate information and support with feeding. And this is something that needs to change. So like I said, the survey as a whole is helping to form where we go with our campaigning. And that is me for now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Heidi, for that. Now, I was delighted I was involved with some work with BirthWise over the last maybe 18 months. And I can remember some of the work with lobbying for changes to access for partners to be allowed into maternity wards. And I remember my cousin and good friend at the time was having her first baby and very anxious about not having her partner attend her first scan, and was delighted then she was able to take him with her on subsequent scans and appointments. But I know, as Bonyaba had pointed out on their presentation, that the fight isn't over for a lot of things, and I know some of our trusts have changed some of their restrictions around visiting, so it's something that we need to keep the pressure on, and also the work of the All-Party Parliamentary Group, the APG, that's been a great first as well, and I know there's been some great discussions from that, so that's great and well done on that. So our final speaker, I'm going to move on, so thanks again, Heidi. It doesn't need a massive introduction, but it's Dr. Jennifer Hanratty, our very own co-founder of Breastival, So she's going to talk to us a bit about how our fabulous little festival came about. So over to you, Jennifer.
Thanks so much, Claire, and thanks everyone for joining us this evening. So yeah, I am going to share a little, wrong button, share a little video that we put together to talk about, share this sort of story of how we started. So here we go.
What you get when you put in. What I get when I put in. Pumping out the oil to grease my lumber. It's overtaken, old music start to waken, Cause life's too short to worry about the keep my feel love and all the scary. This is what you get when you put in. Life's too short to
So that, sorry, I'm still listening to the music in my head. That just gives you an impression of Breastival and why we started. And as Claire said, it was something that came out of, at the time that my eldest was born, there was an awful lot of negativity around breastfeeding in the media, and there was just this sense that it was something that kind of there was an embarrassment or there was shame associated with it. Those ridiculous comments about exhibitionism were just totally daft. And so I think myself then and Jenny, who I met through a breastfeeding support group, we just thought, let's do something to bring a little bit of positivity back to the picture, and maybe we can change some of those headlines. And so we did the first Breastival event. We thought, we'll do a big latch on. That was always the kind of thing that we were doing, was talking about the big latch on. And then we thought, we'll do a little, we'll maybe see if we could do a little yoga class, or we'll do something around that, get some local businesses in to come and have the crack. And we had 500 people registered, and we freaked out and panicked, and we very fortunately got some funding through the Public Health Agency in Northern Ireland, and Janet Calvert, who's been a strong advocate within the Public Health Agency for breastfeeding for a number of years. Janet had generously given us some funding, and so we were able to hire a proper venue, and we had our first event in 2017. And since then we've grown. We have an amazing board. Claire Flynn is one of our board members, as is Nuala Toman, and this year we had the pleasure of gaining some funding from the Community Foundation, so that we were able to employ a coordinator, which is fabulous. Catherine is, everyone has been seeing running all of the events this week. But I think the thing about Breastival is that it was just something that started because we saw a need. We felt that there was a need, and it was something that we needed for ourselves to bring some positivity to the narrative around breastfeeding, because there was so much negativity out there. And we had been fortunate enough to be connected to a community of breastfeeding women through breastfeeding groups, through Sure Start groups, through the Health Trust groups, but also online through Breastfeeding Northern Ireland Facebook group, and really being part of that community online and being able to try to create a space where women could come together and celebrate and feel normal, so that we could actually have those conversations and maybe complain about how breastfeeding's not going so well, and not be told, should just stop, you've done enough, should just give a bottle, what are you whinging about? That actually you could have a space where you could come together and feel normal together. And then over the years we've tried to do different things. We are quite cheeky, quite fun, always focused on doing interesting things. So we've done a range of different things. You'll see this week that we've got a big balloon sculpture in a shopping centre in Oma. And we have this week we're going to be installing our More Than Milk exhibition, which is a mum-led exhibition where women have submitted images of themselves feeding their babies in various different positions and locations across Northern Ireland. That's going to be installed in the Kennedy Centre tomorrow morning as part of the Féile Festival. So part of what we do is about bringing a sense of positivity and normalising breastfeeding in spaces beyond just maternity services. So, you know, there are things and improvements that need to happen within maternity services to make sure that women get those first few days off to a good start and that continue to get that support. But it's also important that you have that wider message throughout society that breastfeeding is just normal. It's not anything to be hidden away or ashamed of. It's just a normal part of everyday life, and we can have a bit of crack and have a laugh about it as well while we're at it. So that's me.
Thanks, Jennifer. I never sort of get sick of hearing that story or watching that video. It always sort of puts a smile on my face. And I suppose just thinking back to my own experience, you know, I think sometimes in terms of people's motivations to get involved in something bigger, you know, sometimes comes from something negative. So when I was off maternity leave in 2016, it was reacting to those comments by Sammy Wilson at the time about women being exhibitionists that sort of really made my blood boil, and I wanted to do something about it. And I suppose from my background coming from sort of policy and public affairs, I knew at that time the Programme for Government, which is our executive's plan for that period of the next 5 years, was out for consultation. So I thought, right, I'm going to respond to that. And I suppose with the help of, you know, Facebook breastfeeding in Northern Ireland Facebook page, being able to generate like 3,000 signatures for that and submit that as, I suppose, the start of my involvement in this work. And that's then how I got to meet Jennifer and Nuala. And I suppose, you know, the rest is history, but it's just about how, you know, getting together in those networks are really important. And I think somebody had a question coming in there just about how, you know, making Breastival bigger than Northern Ireland. So that's something that maybe we can come back to the panel with. But there's definitely an opportunity to think big, you know, now that we've sort of captured, you know, 5 years in Northern Ireland. But I suppose the online presence in the last 2 years has given us an even wider reach, which has been a sort of unique aspect of this. So listen, thank you very much for all our speakers. I suppose now we want to sort of turn it over to you guys in terms of having a discussion. Some really inspiring stories there about campaigning, you know, different, but there's some common themes within that. So I thought if it was okay if I could kick off with maybe asking a question of each of our speakers. So from my experience in sort of voluntary work and campaigning, you know, I think collaboration is really important to success. Also just looking at the different skill set within some of the, you know, talking about Báinne Beatha, BirthWise and Breastival. So what do you think has been crucial to your campaigning successes? Maybe somebody from Báinne Beatha wants to...
I think you hit the nail on the head there with the collaboration. You know, I'd love to say that we had somebody specific in mind, but it really was good fortune that meant that there was a spread of skill sets across the four of us. Research is not my background, so when I did the questionnaire, it was to hear about people's experiences, but in terms of analysing data and collating information like that, it's not my skill set. So, you know, Felicia was brilliant at her literature review, and Lucia, this professional background in research. So to have them two was just a godsend. And then Meg, it just made it look beautiful and accessible, even for politicians who will take 2 minutes to look at something. So if there's absolutely no way that I would be here or Báinne Beatha would be here if it wasn't for the other three of them. And I think you're right. I think collaboration is, you can't, you know, especially on a voluntary basis, you can't do everything all as one person. And so I think that's why we are where we are, is because of having the skill set, and also just really inviting people to do stuff that they really enjoy doing, you know, not trying to force anyone to do I don't know, you know, in every job you might have a little bit of work that you do that you don't really enjoy, but to really lean into your skill set, I think, is something that everybody benefits from.
And I suppose to add to that, also the wider collaboration. So we really, before we launched the campaign, we made sure that anyone who's been working in this area for the last number of years, the experts in this knew about us, that we met with them, that we invited them to be part of our campaign to really, I suppose, see how we can all join our voices in achieving this objective. Because again, there's such a huge ecosystem of breastfeeding support groups and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera in Ireland. So really just making sure that we felt like imposters coming into this as for mothers, so we were really wary of making sure that we didn't, I suppose, that everyone who could be informed was informed, and that we really tried to work with them and really invited the conversation as opposed to just barge in, if that makes any sense.
I think the same with BirthWise as well. I mean, when it first came together, it's a group of people who are all passionate about supporting parents through pregnancy and birth and beyond. But then when things need to get done, I'm constantly amazed at the skill set that lies in the background. And obviously, as you build on the volunteers, then you can expand on that as well. There was quite a few of us that do have backgrounds within the likes of Short Start or working in the trust. Like I say, my background's early years as well. So you kind of have that knowledge and experience to bring of services and how they work. But it's all the other wee bits, the marketing and social media, and the survey putting together, having people who have that kind of research background and things. It's just amazing that people give up their time as well to do it. But I think that's where we all have that passion to support parents.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to say anything different from anybody else. I mean, it is just recognizing that there's huge passion within the community, and for women who have had a difficult start with breastfeeding, there is such a desire to do something about it for a lot of people, or to help other women to not have that same experience as them. And that along with that passion, there is just an amazing array of skills and people who are willing to give their skills and their time to contribute to doing things and making change happen. And everyone is looking to go in the same direction, and so there's huge power in connecting different organizations together and working together to get to our goals. And I think one of the things that I love about Breastival, and when we had the in-person events, it was so lovely to see so many different organizations being in the same space. And so it was a space for women and family to connect to those organizations, but also a space for those organizations to come together and talk to each other. And I think we had heard some really lovely stories over the years of organizations that maybe wouldn't have worked together before, or there was maybe some speakers that we had over that then got connected into other groups, and then that they were able to work together and kind of cross-pollinate all of those things. So creating those spaces for connection has been a real pleasure over the number of years that we've been working on this.
Brilliant. Well, does anybody want to ask a question, to turn on the camera and ask a question, or I can start feeding through some questions from the chat, but maybe just give a couple of seconds in case anyone wants to raise their hand and to come in and ask a question of any of our panelists. Maybe not. Okay. Well, there's one question about taking Breastival beyond Northern Ireland. So, maybe one of the outcomes, just getting, BirthWise, Breastival and Banya Baha together, and given that a lot of the issues are, not unique to one area. I mean, it is an issue in terms of our breastfeeding rates across the island of Ireland. So that is something to maybe throw back to you. What do you think about something bigger?
Yeah, why not? Although the ask at the end of this week will be all knackered. I don't know if we'll be able for it. But I do think that, there is such huge, and that, we saw that last year where when we were online, suddenly we realized that there were so many other people that were like, oh my God, I want to come too. Like, this is amazing. So it is great that, there is a much wider community out there that is craving that connection as well. And there is a breastfeeding festival that exists in England. So the Breastfeeding Festival in England that Shell Banks, who's speaking on Saturday, was one of the founders of the Breastfeeding Festival in England. But as far as I'm aware, there's nothing similar on the rest of the island of Ireland. So that's definitely something that we can consider for the future now that we've got, we see that there's so many skilled and passionate people around. There's no reason why we can't.
And maybe one back to Banya Baha. I mean, have you had any mothers from north of the border? I know you were talking specifically about maternity services in the south, but just thinking, I mean, I come from a border area just sort of 6 miles from Dundalk, where Jennifer's from, but I mean, have you had any mothers from other parts sort of?
Yeah, I suppose the questionnaire initially, because of the way it was organic, we ended up having the majority of our responses were relating to the 3 Dublin maternity hospitals. So a few from maybe Cork and Limerick, I think, as well, but very, very small. So I guess our responses are kind of limited, in the initial questionnaire to very much just the Dublin region, which is interesting in itself. But I suppose the campaign has brought us wider, and we get stories from all across the island of Ireland, definitely the majority in the Republic, but we do get really interesting stories of people who've maybe had births in different countries. And they're saying, I had my first in Ireland and my second in Australia, and the difference is just phenomenal, or, other European countries, and just hearing those comparisons and the different levels of expectations that people are coming into for their breastfeeding journeys, and how that affects what happens to them is just really interesting to hear. But even hearing from Heidi just saying there that all of your maternity units are BFI accredited is just, for us, phenomenal. Like, I mean, we are so far away from that. It's just so interesting. I think we need to do more work to understand what's going on across the whole island, and how, are there other initiatives that we could, maybe use that kind of benchmark. It's like, if it's happening across the border, what's the difference 2 miles down the road? Can the attitudes really be that different in 2 different parts of the country? And we know they probably can. We know Donegal has one of the lowest rates in the whole of the Republic. But to understand some of the causes of that a bit more, and I think it does come back to having better data, having more information in our national maternity survey, and potentially running the Banya Baha survey again, and potentially expanding it to the north if we were to do that, and get a bit more of an understanding of it. Went on mute there because that's enough talking. Sorry.
Well, that's an interesting point. I think maybe one of the outcomes would be, at least at a minimum, to share information between us all. So like you say, with that benchmarking idea, I know engaging with any elected representatives, our MLAs, a number of them will be very interested in what's happening in other parts of Ireland and the UK. So again, in a lot of our briefing material, having the knowledge of what's happening in other areas will be really important, and whether we use that as a leverage because we want something better, or to point out that we're ahead. So, just to be able to use that. So that's really, really interesting. Anyone else want to come in with a question?
I had just asked something, Claire. I went to Breastival for the first time just last year, so both are obviously virtual. So pardon me if this does occur, but I was just wondering, for the big latch on, or big virtual latch on as I knew it, does that occur like in the conference space whenever it happens in person, or is that something that like takes up a public space, where like women gather and take up a public space together, or what way does that operate? I'm just thinking more of, for me anyway, I was about 5 or 6 months into feeding Donal, and I thought Breastival was incredible. It had just been recommended to me by a couple of friends, including Michelle Gildernew, and I just thought it was amazing for just dispelling some of the kind of the myths around breastfeeding, and some of the stigma that you do feel if you're sitting in like a public space and people are all around you and you feel a bit awkward. And it was just reminding you, like, you have every right to be comfortable, just to sit somewhere comfortably. This is your baby, you're giving life to them, like, take up that space. So whether the big latch home provides that opportunity, I'm not sure, but just to ask.
Yeah, Colette, thanks very much, and thanks for joining us again this year. Yeah, we absolutely do. We take over the first year that we were, well, actually, I ran a big latch on in 2016 and did that on the lawn of Belfast City Hall. And then we did 2017 was in the Mac in Belfast, and we took over like the whole atrium area. And then we were in the Ulster Museum in 2018 and 2019, and there were some very, very bemused tourists trying to pick their way through all of the mummies who were sitting on the floor feeding babies, a couple of twins, women pumping. Like, we took over the whole of the space in the atrium of the Ulster Museum, and that was a really deliberate choice because it is a public space, and the Ulster Museum were incredibly supportive of what we were doing, and they are signed up to the Breastfeeding Welcome Scheme that we have here in Northern Ireland. So that was definitely a very, very deliberate choice to make it that it's not that it's a public festival, but just as you said, Colette, taking up that space that you have every right to take up that space. And the lovely thing that happened then, because of where the Ulster Museum is in Belfast, it's right beside the Botanic Gardens, and then there's a whole row, a street of restaurants and cafes. So throughout the day then, families were kind of spilling down onto the street, and you could see people kind of just out and enjoying the sunshine and feeding their babies. And it was just such a lovely atmosphere on the day, to just, people were just kind of out and about and enjoying the sunshine, just happened to all be feeding their babies together as well. So yeah, we're desperate to get back to an in-person space, but we're doing our best online, and putting photographs out and having our breastfeeding mummy in the windows to get that kind of normalizing influence out there, even though we're in a virtual space.
That's fantastic. Thanks a million for that, Jennifer.
Thanks, Colette.
And I think we've added we can add the link to some of the images, Colette, that we have on our website, the sort of capture, those, the big latch on, which was great, because I remember my first experience of that was in the Mac, which was year 2, is that right, Jennifer? And just remember being surrounded by loads of other women with, feeding was just such an amazing experience. And it was that, the normalizing, but, the celebrating point of it as well. And it was just really powerful. And then we went to a bigger venue and we filled that one again. So I think when we do get back into a venue, we may need to think bigger. Hopefully we'll have many more people there. So anyone else got a question coming in? If not, I do have questions, and maybe some of our panelists have questions of each other. Maybe that's something to turn back to you guys.
Claire, can I just ask Ciara here? I wanted just to ask Banya about just future plans. I remember Hazel was talking there a while ago about, this is an idea maybe for the north as well, about pictures on the buses and Dublin bus, and it's just, I think it's a great idea. So I don't know, do you know anything more about that, and just future plans for yourselves?
I'm not sure about the pictures in the buses. I don't know, Meg or Lucia can answer that one. I haven't heard about that. It sounds intriguing. In terms of future plans, that is the hot question at the moment for ourselves. We have been approached by 2 different academic departments to really go deep on the research, and so that's something they've applied for funding for that. One department has, and then there's another who's going to start in January. So it does feel like we're going to be entering a different phase, but we're just not quite sure yet what that phase is going to look like. But certainly research is going to be a part of that. We started as a campaign as opposed to an organization or a club or a charity or a company, and so that's another issue that needs to be, we need to think about that. Lots of things, but research is definitely going to be a part of our future, at least for the next year. Sorry, I don't have a better answer than that. I don't know if Meg or Lucia have any.
No, I know. So I suppose when we met with Hazel too, she did have a hope to run something like a breastfeeding festival before she wrapped up as Lord Mayor of Dublin, and I know she held a small version of that by hosting some breastfeeding mothers in the Mansion House. But I mean, from our understanding, there was definitely a hope to do something more ambitious and make Dublin into a breastfeeding friendly city. But I guess with that comes the recognition that these things take time, and it can't be just achieved in a short amount of time. So really, perhaps that desire keeps growing, but is still there, but it's not something that we're aware of. But it's, again, we have been putting out the story still, and it's something that we're still wondering about continuing doing. So we're at the moment, we're in the phase of reflecting, and as Deborah said, this year has been a steep learning curve and it has taken us by surprise. So we're doing a lot of reflection on where to go next and what to do. So yeah.
And sorry, somebody asked there about what the research is about. It will basically, I would imagine it'll take a similar form to the questionnaire we did before, but we will have, you know, ethics approval. Well, actually, Lucia could probably talk more about this because research is her background. So Lucy, I don't know if you want to answer this one. She just asked the question, what is the research about?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, so we shall see, but ultimately we want to understand what's happening, you know, and what is the reason of the variation, why, you know, what, again, I suppose it is a question that comes up time and time again, is what evidence do you have and do you know more? And you know, and we do believe that research comes hand in hand with policy. So ultimately we're looking for something that is very applied and something that would help us understand more. We also have been hoping to talk to the HSC and the Health Information Quality Authority, HIQA, sorry, who ran the National Maternity Experience Survey, really working hard on not talking acronyms because that just loses all the meaning then. So again, we've linked up with them to see if there is an opportunity to revisit the survey and expand it to really focus in on the breastfeeding supports, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I suppose reflecting back on our 5 asks and trying to see how the research and our next activities can work towards supporting those.
Brilliant.
I just wanted to mention that well, there was the question about images on buses and the things that we're doing with images and the More Than Milk exhibition. I've just put the link into the chat if anyone wants to submit to that. But the other thing that happened in Northern Ireland, was it 2 years ago, 3 years ago, was that there was the Not Sorry Mums campaign, which was something that tangentially influenced by ourselves. We had set up a community of practice that was bringing together academics and advocates and people who were working in support and also policymakers, where we brought people together just on an informal basis, where we just kind of had a meeting once a month or once every 2 months. We kind of have a topic where we talk about things, and it was something that came up where there was overall sense that we needed more public information about breastfeeding and support for breastfeeding, and that was something that was kind of came out of those conversations, and there was influencing then that happened in the background to help to secure funding for a public health information campaign, which was launched a number of years ago by the Public Health Agency, called the Not Sorry Mums campaign. And they were able to gather some really good data that demonstrated that did have a positive impact on public perceptions of breastfeeding, and it was a very Northern Ireland campaign. It was all about the fact that we all go around saying sorry all the time, and feeding her baby in public was the one thing that she wasn't sorry for. And so I think that we have been very fortunate here that in the last number of years there have been really positive movements, like having all of the maternity units being baby friendly accredited and having a public information campaign. There's definitely still changes that need to happen, and still positive moves that can be made, but there has been some really good stuff happening here over the last number of years, and we hope that those positive changes will continue.
Great. We have a question from our Breastival chair, Nuala. Nuala, do you want to come in?
Thank you. I was just finding my microphone because I had my camera off eating my dinner. So apologies that it was on top of my head there. Yeah, I was really interested in, and this relates to Banya Baha, but has relevance to our region. I was really interested just in terms of the process around pre-budget submissions. Having worked in Leinster House, I understand the importance of engaging with the budget, and there are lots of facilities within that particular administration for parties to work to develop costed proposals around particular initiatives and actually to put real figures on interventions. I'm also a founding member of the NI Women's Budget Group, following being a member of the Scottish Women's Budget Group. And we have a big focus on the need for gender budgeting and equality budgeting. I think it's really brilliant that you have engaged at that level. Some of the difficulties we have locally is that there isn't really a consultation on the budget there isn't a framework for credibly developing costed approaches. And one of the things that we do have is legislation that can be applied to budgeting to ensure that it equally impacts on men, rather than, you know, on men and women and all sorts of other equality groups fairly. But these kind of initiatives aren't taken up, and it's a constant gap within policy development. And when you're thinking about breastfeeding, obviously there's a clear economic argument for investing in breastfeeding, and looking at savings around kind of how savings at a societal level for interventions that could be implemented locally. And I just wondered if there'd be any opportunities for us to work together in terms of a capacity building way to find and test some models for testing and costing interventions around breastfeeding in the absence of that facility that, you know, that we don't have locally.
Yeah, I think you've probably touched on, it's interesting somebody just raised the question, what's been the biggest challenges? Because for us, getting to grips with all of this stuff, from parliamentary questions through to pre-budget submissions, the process, who does what, when, you know, we obviously, well, I certainly wasn't paying attention in CSP in school because I had no idea of how all this stuff worked and went together. And, you know, I suppose that's where all the relationships we'd made with lots of different networks and, you know, with some politicians as well, who took the time, in fairness to them, to explain, okay, we'll submit this parliamentary question and then this will happen and this would happen. We've submitted an order paper and that means this. And if we get speaking time, this will happen. And they walked us through it and kind of explained what would happen. But the biggest challenge for us has been all of the things we've asked for are already committed to within the action plan that sits within the HSE, and they have the responsibility to implement that action plan, and it's due for completion this year and it's been extended. So obviously very few of the things that should be completed have been done. But for us to understand how these I guess these initiatives get costed and get approved has kind of just been a really grey area for us to understand. So I think for me certainly, that would be a really great next step for us, is to have that kind of capability building and learning across the island to kind of understand how these things happen. And you should probably be telling us how this works, given all your experience, Nuala. But you know, that's the kind of barrier we've kind of come up against now, and I suppose that's maybe why we're looking into the research aspect of things next, to give us more evidence. But I do think that's where, you know, that's the next level up in activism for us, is getting the capability to understand how these things get through and how change actually happens, how policies get costed, how they get implemented. So sign us up, I suppose, is my answer to that, if you have the answers.
Thank you.
Sounds great, and sounds like that's maybe an action that we need to note from today, to something that we can take forward. So I can't believe, but we've like 4 minutes left of our scheduled time. So it sort of takes us nicely to the last part of this evening, which is the launch of our Breastival breastfeeding advocacy toolkit. So I think Catherine's going to share just what that might look like. So I don't think we have enough time to sort of go through it in an awful lot of detail. So please go away and have a read of this. But this is something that we produce to help others who want to advocate for breastfeeding. So we're hoping that the toolkit will be a useful resource, sort of save people some time, give them some hints and tips about what people can do, and give you the sort of evidence research, as well as signposting to other organisations who are more than happy to have your support. So many of these with breastfeeding need to be tackled at the legislative level, and we heard, you know, some of our elected reps talking about that earlier today. But I think what's clear is that, you know, we need everybody's help to inform decision makers about what the problems are, and also help them with some solutions, and underpinning that with evidence. This toolkit has all of that information, so you can sort of cherry pick what you want, but I think it's very important to have a sort of personal story if you to engage with elected representatives. So, you know, many of our decision makers also need sort of an incentive to act. So making sure that you contact your local representatives in advance, especially of any elections. And I know here in the north we have elections coming up in May 2022, not far off. But we also will have parties who will be, come this autumn, will be starting to develop their own manifestos. So again, thinking about some of the actions that we have, policy actions we have developed as part of this toolkit, to mention those to anyone who knocks on your door campaigning, which will probably be happening in early spring, you know, probably around February. However, we understand, I suppose, in this context, that we are up against some really powerful opposition when I think of like the formula companies. So we need to keep calling them out. So in some of the actions in one of the pages in the toolkit, it sort of gives you an idea of what you can do if you have 5 minutes, 15 minutes of time. And there's some great organisations. We've obviously heard from some of them today, but you know, the Code Monitoring NI and the Baby Feeding Law Group in Ireland, especially in this year, which is the 40th anniversary of the code. But I think for me, coming away from this evening was just about, you know, that collaboration point. I think everyone agreed that it's really important that we work together. You know, and effective advocacy is about building our collective power, that we can make a difference. And I think having that sort of united breastfeeding sector, I know we talk about different sectors, but I think there's maybe an emerging breastfeeding sector. So, you know, how do we work together, north, south and further field, to sort of build our case? And there is political will out there, and I think we just need to build that support in terms of our decision makers, and I think partnership with the wider sector will be key. So I just want to say thank you to all our speakers for their presentations and for the questions as well from the floor. I think it's really inspiring stuff to hear how amazing things can happen when we, you know, passionate people sort of get together and mobilise, and with a strong desire to make things better. So with that in mind, I think Catherine's posted the toolkit in the chat, so do have a read, as I say, and we would love to hear your feedback on what the toolkit is like, as well as anything that you might do as a result of it. So with that, just to say good luck with all your advocating.